Once I was a seeker. I journeyed the world, trying to discover some forgotten remedy for my ailing goddess, some sign of the others who did not return, the vanished. I left my home, my family, my people on this fool's errand, sleeping alone under the uncaring stars and subsisting on scraps like a wandering dog. It was a journey that required me to make bedfellows with murderers and cultists, sacrificing piece by piece my morals in a fruitless search for answers. My long path has brought me here, to my home among the stones. The barrier between our world and all others is thinnest here. It is so scant that I can hear the songs of other realms in my dreams. My search for truth ended in Henge Hold, where all those scraps I've gathered were collated by visions gifted to me as I slumbered. While such visions left me ultimately to the truth I sought, it came with a high cost. While I thought I searched for hope, what I found was madness. In the last, I gave up even my own identity. The youth who dwelled in Mistbower Forest, who looked with wonder on the gleaming cities of Ios, is no more. My home is now stone and mud, apart from all others of my kind. They call me the Hermit of Henge now. It is as good a name as any other. I once put aside my old name, a symbolic gesture, but now I no longer even remember it. The folly of a young life made me think hope could be found if I just searched in the right places. Instead, I discovered the truth. Oblivion awaits. All that we have cherished and valued and thought imperishable is fleeting, and even our immortal selves will be battered off by emotionless beings. Our essence will be but another number in the accounting ledgers of a vast and faceless machine. This account is true, so far as any telling of such events can purport it to be. I have gathered it over years of a wasted life, snatched from bits over the centuries of toil. In it, I have compiled the words of Henge prophets rotting on their deathbeds, scriptures stolen from immoren's oldest churches, fairy tales told around fires, and records of my own people stretching back to before the time the sky bridge fell and lit an empire afire, scorching all life from the east. I have seen visions of truths that others cannot know. I write this as a final warning, one last attempt to make others mend their ways. This record may serve as my epitaph, the gravestone words of my life, and that of many others to give a number. If any survive the dark days ahead, perhaps they can look back at these words and understand, as much as any could, the arrogant and short-sighted choices that led us to where we find ourselves now. The world as you knew it is no more. Only greed and cruelty reign now. Those who have passed are lucky, for they need not endure the horror that awaits those yet living. There remains a small chance of reversing this, though it grows slimmer with each passing hour. In the beginning, there was nothing, an infinite span of rolling darkness, chaos, and potential. And then, between the beats of those cosmic moments, they were born. Motes of power coalesced. Long before our world came to be, there were sparks of malevolent thoughts out in the deeper darkness, fighting with one another, seeking dominance. Closer to where we would come to exist, something more ordered came to be. It is unclear whether gods or the world came first, though it may be the first god was also the world. Other gods formed in the greater emptiness beyond, bringing substance where they gathered, and each making the world its dominion as best they could. In the moment of the world's birthing, the infinite pulled itself into pieces, erecting membranes between the possible and the impossible, between the realms of body and the realms of spirit. On one side of the veil was the realm of spirits, the place most known now as caen. On the other, its rigid mirror, the realm of matter and physical law. We call this caen, though vision suggests there may be other worlds with other names, perhaps in a number beyond counting, each with its own mirror. I cannot speak to those places. In the early days, neither caen nor caen, or how we know them now. They were looser places, still forming and connected. It was easier to cross from one to the next. The first god was the mother, Dunia, a being of gentle comfort and warmth, who made her flesh the clay of the physical world. The seasons flowed with her thoughts and moods, both warm and generous, and cold and cruel. And then from her all life would ultimately descend. Either born from her or drawn to her endless fertility came the infinite beast, the ever-hungry serpent. It offered hunger to the mortal world, and the fangs and claws by which one could satiate that desire. Using the flesh of the mother, the worm gave birth to ravenous hunting beasts and power to all who professed to act as it did. The first peoples who arose on caen were said to carry in their veins the very lifeblood of the world, and they worshipped the mother, and called the worm their father. These were the Trollkin, followed in turn by Orgren, Gobbas, and other wilderness races often overlooked by the civilized. In time, Dunia tired of the worm, and so created the hunter to drive it away. This chase took both to caen, there to remain, but the hunter, soon known as Menoth, left behind a people spawned in his likeness. They and the others, earliest peoples, lived in tribal barbarity, left to fend for themselves in a world that sought to feast upon them. Even as life multiplied on caen, other gods emerged to secure places for themselves in caen. There was the mountain god Gore, selfish and cold, who created a race of slaves as implacable as its own slopes. These would one day become the Great Fathers, who would revolt and slay the mountain to earn their freedom. The distant sun and moons intermingled to create the greatest and the wisest of all gods, the divine court, 8 in number, who would give rise to my own doomed people. Micaiah, Osiris, Nairo, Alicia, Skyra, Lunarsar, Lysis, and Nisor. They took command over the vital cycles of life, the passage of time, the turning of day to night and back again, and the wheel of the seasons. These divine beings stood on the broader, more expansive side of the looking glass, where existence bent to their faintest thoughts. They looked upon this fertile realm of spirit and claimed their places in it, crafting with the power of their desires. The divine court created the Veld, a great forest within they would have erected a palace, a place hard won from the hostile wilds of the hellish landscape beyond. At the Veld's borders prowled an endless array of voracious spiritual beasts that would have despoiled this paradise, if not driven away. Elsewhere other gods settled, with the Great Fathers erecting a great tower from the rocky innards of their creator. Between long bouts of chasing and wrestling with the worm, Menoth built a retreat where he could recoup and rest. At first, a place for a simple fastness, but one that became a gleaming fortress, and eventually a great city gilded in fire, gold, and marble. The mother alone remained in the world of caen, a power devoted to making it lush and fertile. And all the while, amid the hellish landscapes of trackless Yrcaen, the worm stalked, going whenever others would not, and where it could gambol and devour to its heart's content. Its bestial prodigy hunted on caen while it hunted for souls that had passed over. In time, the gods turned their attention upon the mirror of their realm. Over uncounted years, they refined the physical world to becoming pleasing to their eyes, sculpting the mountains and carving out oceans. Their creations in the mortal realm were grand but incomplete. My gods could see a void that needed filling, creatures to look back at them and praise them, to acknowledge their greatness. They looked at Dunia's children and Menob's teeming progeny and dreamed of creating something like them, yet more refined. Their interest was drawn to the glimmers of spiritual power left after these mortals perished, which wafted to Yrcaen and there enriched the gods they praised. With each mortal was a spark of the divine, a soul. With great interest, the gods watched how, as mortals came together in unity, they spontaneously created new souls. Short-lived and simple unions though they were, each coupling created something new and infinite. The gods saw that such an action of creation would profit them beyond the simple vanity of worship. The great fathers returned to caen's mountains, there to make wives of clay, and with them sire the clans of what would become rule. By the guidance of their divine parents, rule folk carved a worthy civilization amid their mountains. So, too, the divine court looked upon these lesser beings who could speak and sing, but who were misshapen and unlovely to their eyes, and the great beings knew they could do better. Lacria, the Narcissor of ages, accepted the mantle of creation after a long period of thought and consideration, weighing how to craft a singular people, one in form akin to Menop's humanity, but superior in every way. Her creation would be the elves of Laos, birthed by Lacria but aided by the rest of the divine court. Even the insatiate divine beast understood the value of mortal souls, though it let others create as it hunted and devoured those souls that landed in its realm, far from the domains of their gods. And some gods were heartless, bestowing life and then abandoning their creations to an unfeeling world, while others, above all the divine court, wished to see their children prosper and granted them many talents and gifts to help their souls flourish. It was not the gods alone who looked upon the shining souls of mortals and coveted what they represented. The parasitic and malevolent beings that formed in the great outer abyss watched and envied what the gods had wrought. The place where they had dwelled was a black afterbirth of creation, devoid of anything resembling the divinity of Yrcaen or the potential of caen, a place of neither death nor life, but of horror and shadow. Though possessed of immense power and appetite for more, these infernals could not create life like the gods. Their realm had no material mirror. They could only languish in their black prisons, separate from the other realms by vast distance and a thickening barrier. Still, though they could not pass into the spirit or mortal realms, they knew the value present in both. Infernals hungered for the power of souls, catching faint whiffs of their potential through the barriers between worlds. Through great trial and effort, the Infernals learned they could send their thoughts, if not their beings, into other realms, there to taunt and tempt and lure. So the Infernals sat, hungry and jealous, peering across the expanse of infinity at the other worlds and other realms that contained what they so desired. Orders of Infernals probed the skins of places like caen and caen, seeking vulnerabilities where they could extend threads of their immense influence. They learned to touch the minds of mortals, which they could gradually corrupt with promises of power in exchange for spiritual energy. But these were just morsels to a starving man. They needed more. Much more. The Infernals saw the bounty in caen as the greatest possible feast, and so set out to probe its defenses, burning up myriads upon myriads of captured souls to chip away at whatever weaknesses they could discover. This probing eventually led an infernal society called the Namkiridian Order to uncover a weakness in the ferment of caen. In the most verdant and beautiful expanse of the realm, these Infernals discovered they could push into the home of the divine court, the Vel. Left raw and weakened by the outlay of energy required to create the elven people, the Vel had drawn perilously close to the chasm of the outer abyss, almost within reach. The first attempts at incursion into the Veld by the Infernals were poorly understood by the Divine Court. They had long battled feral spirits from the hellish wilds where the worm prowled. It was easy to mistake the new horrors as another variant on this theme. But soon Lucinar, the god of scouts and summer, determined that this was a far greater peril, one that might be even capable of annihilating their best-laid defenses. The crier risked her sanity to peer into the outer abyss, to view this foe with her keen intellect. She saw the highest Infernals were infinite beings, given to equally infinite desires. Some of these beings were of a scope akin to the gods. She felt their malice and their hunger to feast. So, too, the Divine Court realized their actions of generosity had created vulnerabilities. Efforts to pass culture and wisdom and the power over magic to their mortal followers had required gifts be sent from the Veld to caen. This required an investment of the court's divine essence, leaving both the gods and their realm exposed. Even as the Infernals began to probe the border of the Veld, the Divine Court decided to act. In council, they decided the scope of the foe was far too great, and the souls of the fallen within the Veld would be vulnerable, as would be the gods themselves. The crowd perceived that they must flee the parasitic Infernals and collapse the passage behind them. This would require the help of their mortal children. The gods prepared to pass through the Veil and into caen to live amongst the elves, safe from infernal attack, at least for a time. Once the threat had passed and the Infernals had found easier prey, they could return and rebuild. To facilitate their journey, Nysor, the Grand Crafter, began construction of a bridge in caen, while elven engineers replicated his work in caen, creating the Bridge of Worlds. Construction lasted for over 200 years. Though the span of an elf's lifetime, it was but a moment to the gods, built with urgency as infernal horrors clawed at the gates of the Veld, to be met by blade and arrow from the arsenals of the gods. With the Infernals snapping at their heels, the gods abandoned the Veld and sealed the way behind them. Drawing on a great deal of the divine power they had invested in their home, they reinforced the barriers between caen and caen, as well as between caen and the outer abyss. Each of these realms were driven apart, and the distance between them hardened. Many of the would-be invaders were destroyed in the process. A rather fitting end, if you ask me. But this left the divine court cut off from what remained of the Veld and its inhabitants. It was hoped that this would be a temporary absence. Whatever was lost could always be remade. Their great haste, at least by divine standards, may explain the disaster that occurred when the divine court crossed the threshold to caen. It may have been an inevitable consequence of the vast and unfathomable energies involved. From my visions, I believe the gods had forgotten how brittle the material world would be compared to the fluid and resilient fabric of the realm of spirits. Whatever the cause, though the Bridge of Worlds functioned as intended, it collapsed upon their passage, exploding with tremendous arcane force and unleashing utter chaos. This was the cataclysm. It rent asunder the entire empire of Laos, the civilization of my ancestors, and cracked the very bones of the world. Even today, the cataclysm's power is felt in the east, with the never-ending turmoil of the Stormlands. Despite the cataclysm, the Bridge of Worlds had served its purpose. The divine court had escaped the infernals, who were thrown back into the outer abyss. Taking the surviving elves under their wing, the divine court journeyed through the Stormlands to forge a new home in the west, in the Mistborn forests, the kingdom of Ios. But while they remained for centuries with their people, caen was not their native land, and they languished in the material world, growing ever weaker. When at last they left to return to the Veld, it might have been too late. In the intervening time, the barriers between worlds had become even stronger. In the years the divine court remained with their people to build Ios, humanity multiplied and spread farther west. Many had turned to worshipping bestial totems, their ancestors, or other now-forgotten gods. The Mulgur rose as a tribal confederation revering the worm above all. Menoth saw this and became wrathful. He returned to his people, rebuking them for forgetting him, and he chose priest-kings to build civilization in his name. He imparted gifts, including the building of walls, agriculture, the power of fire as a weapon and a symbol, and his strict, unyielding laws. They began to reclaim the wilderness and to spread the worship of the Creator to the wayward tribes. The cataclysm saw their first city abandoned as the desert claimed it, but they would soon erect an even greater city, once called Calisea, now Caspia, which remains their greatest stronghold. They subjugated and beat back the followers of the Worm in Dunia, enacting bloody crusades by the sword and the flame. As human civilization spread, two special humans rose to prominence in Caspia, the twins, Morrow and Thamar. Born in a time when humanity's only choices were to kneel in obedience to Menoth, supplicate themselves to the devourer worm, or risk the uncertainties of an afterlife spent in the hells of caen, they offered another path. They rejected slavery and fear, blazing a new way forward for their race. Morrow taught that there was more to life than strict obedience to an absent and uncaring God, and suggested mortals could improve their lot through their deeds. They spoke of self-will and control over one's destiny, but their teachings were vastly different. Morrow saw in humans the potential for self-sacrifice and courage. His time as a soldier gave him perspective on finding honor even in the grimmest of hours. Morrow understood the limitless potential of the human soul, and how one could, through deed and sheer power of thought, nurture these souls and empower them beyond the capacity of their birth. His sister Thamar's message, however, was the darker side of that coin, pointing out the virtues of selfishness and autonomy. Yet amid this message was also a lesson of freedom and a rejection of tyranny. To the throng suffering under midnight rule, both twins offered a hope they had yet not imagined. Midnights tried to suppress their growing throngs of adherents with fire and steel, punishing all those who followed the words of Morrow or Thamar. Perhaps the Midnights could have stamped out the faith in its earliest days, had Morrow not proved the strength of their philosophy, or Thamar the depth of her convictions. Midnight's accrutators made cruel examples of the Morrowan and Thamrite followers, performing public executions that left the condemned lingering for days. In response, the twins banded together and marched on those governing Caspia. In their hour of victory, Thamar executed the leader of the Midnight Faith, much to Morrow's grief, for he sought a more peaceful truce. He exiled his sister along with her followers, only to see her return as an enemy. Proving his belief in his own teachings, Morrow sacrificed himself for the good of all, and then ascended as a self-made god. In their fervor, the witnesses to this transfiguration fell upon Thamar, killing her, thus prompting her own ascension to godhood. This was the ultimate proof of the teachings of both twins, that the mortal soul could rise to divinity, born of mortal flesh, made magnificent in the moments of their depths. The twins founded a bipartial faith of light and darkness, and entered caen as equals, not only to each other, but to the other gods as well. Though the Midnights tried for a time to repress these faiths while they were still in their infancy, something unheard of transpired in caen. I have seen with my own eyes this vision as the lawgiver, once the hunter, accepted the twins into caen with certain promises intended to seal an accord between them. Menov saw an opportunity in their rise. For too long he had been in this city of man, protecting the souls of his fallen, fighting a defensive war against the worm. So he might focus on his ancient foe, the lawgiver bestowed upon Morrow a measure of oversight of humanity. Morrow accepted these terms, and for a long time upheld the trust placed in him. He vowed to regulate his sister and her followers, and to not give mankind any greater gifts than the one Menov himself had already provided. While the Nono-Korean Order, Infernals, suffered setbacks following their failed attack on the Veld, others had risen to power through manipulation of the mortal realm. Potent infernal masters from the Felgoeth Order whispered offerings into the dreams of mortals, promising power and the bestowment of black gifts. Through umbral proxies, which passed into caen through a web of shadows, these infernals offered to contract with susceptible humans, trading souls for their gifts. Many mortals failed to comprehend the gravity of this cost, and signed away their very souls willingly, only dreading their fate when the terms were about to come to due. The Felgoeth were most successful with a confederation of human conquerors on one of caen's continents to the west of immoren. Already brutal and violent, these humans eventually eschewed their traditional worship of their creator and offered themselves wholly to a cabal of infernal masters. In return, they swept across their nation, using blood and shadow to turn every inhabitant they encountered to worship, or sending them as offerings for the sacrificial pyre. The Infernals bestowed upon them great strength, endurance, might and occult power. The infernal-worshipping Orgoth forged an empire that soon spread across the world. Fleets of their dreaded black ships descended upon scattered island peoples, and even to the southern continent of Zu. While all other seafarers learned to respect and fear the tempests of the Meridius, the Orgoth carved through the waters as a black iron blade. So too did the Orgoth land upon the western shores of immoren, beginning one of the darkest periods in the continent's history. During the long occupation, the Orgoth caused no end of sufferings. Many thousands regularly went as sacrifices, their souls either captured in occult vessels for use later on, or harvested initially for the infernals. The land became a kingdom of tortured slaves under the whips of a cruel and uncaring master. Such desperate times led to desperate measures. While brave souls did their best to fight back, and a few pockets of resistance yet kept the occupiers at bay, without a remarkable turn of fate, the occupiers' hold on immoren would grow to be unbreakable, and even the gods became concerned at that. Morrow looked into the future to seek a way forward. He witnessed that if the Orgoth were not stopped, it would lead to the extinction of both his and the Ma's respective faiths, as widespread death eradicated their worshippers. No matter which thread of fate he explored, Morrow saw no way to prevent this outcome. The Ma would be the one to find a solution. She foresaw that the Emmerys needed powerful new weapons, abilities long denied them, the power to change reality by force of will. Such magic was practiced by the other races, but denied humanity by Menoth. Such a change would require difficult and arduous rites, where even the full extent of the Ma's power and knowledge were inadequate. She saw at once that she would require outside aid. To test the worthiness of her plan, the Ma spoke of her ideals to her brother, who looked again into the future. He saw now one path with a ray of hope, dark as it may be, and rife with terrible consequences. He considered that the Ma should proceed, that they must secure magic for humanity at all costs. To forestall one doom, they might need to embrace another. Knowing the elves had been specially endowed with power, and that their gods had come to Caen to be amongst them, the Ma instructed her chosen to approach the highest priests of Ios with a request for knowledge. She hoped to arrange a meeting of divinities between herself and their gods. What she did not yet know was that the elven gods had already left Ios, seeking a way to return to the Veld. Embittered by the absence of their gods and terrified of outsiders, the elves refused and insulted the envoys of the Dark Goddess. They did not share even the smallest fragments of their knowledge. The Ma considered this an inexcusable affront, but remained convinced that the important lore that might be gained from the divine court might yet be found. She sent Thamorite spies to steal Iosan lore. In this way, she discovered scraps of heretical and forgotten teachings from ancient Liosan sects, with veiled references to the threat of beings beyond Urcain. She read about the construction of the Bridge of Worlds and the Great Cataclysm. The Ma pieced together this puzzle, combining it with lore she had already unearthed on the non-Caridian order, and discerned that the infernal shadow behind the acts of the Iosian gods. This information confirmed a course of action she had already predicted would be necessary. Even before the elves refused her, she considered turning to the infernals to solve her dilemma, knowing, as she did, that they had proven the ability to empower mortals, having done so with her first scions before her ascension. The Ma made contact with a powerful executor, a being of the non-Caridian hierarchy, a being some known as Telcarian, the sounder at the gates. Bringing her first scion to assist her in the negotiations, the Ma set out to seal a contract with these beings. The Nano-Korean order expressed its willingness to grant the Mars request, though it would not be easy or simply done for them. It would involve a tremendous outpouring of energy and a ritual of complexity beyond even divine reckoning, and this would require a commiserate payment. Certain that she had deduced the desires of these beings, the Ma offered as payment assistance in locating the very gods that had once escaped their infernal grasp. As great as this offer was, Teldo-Karim demanded more. For the ritual to be complete, he would need a vast harvest of souls, though the full payment could be deferred. In some distant future, the Nano-Korean order would come for the claiming, during which no less than 2/3 of human souls would be theirs. By deferring the payment, Immoresian humans could recover from the Orgoth, spread and multiply, thus escaping the total scope of the claiming. The leaders of the Nano-Korean order knew that such an arrangement would ensure their ultimate supremacy over all of their rivals, particularly the Felgoeth. The Ma did not hesitate to agree. As great as this price was, it held only the only possible hope for a future. There had never been a more self-assured or confident being than the Ma. So convinced was she of her own infinite potential. Given the claiming would be deferred, the Ma felt certain that she and her brother together could find a way to evade paying this cost. No binding, however strong, could hold her, or so she thought. She included in the contract the stipulation that those who were truly devoted to her and her scions would be shielded from the direct infernal interference. She foresaw her worshippers rising to be leaders of those who would survive the claiming, should it ever come to pass. The goddess and the infernal executor forged their pact. Within a generation, the first human sorcerers would rise from the enslaved populations, and the infernals turned to their mortal followers on caen to hunt down the elusive elven gods. 10 years after the bargain was made, disaster struck Ios. The riveting caused priests of nearly all the fanes to go simultaneously insane, seen by many as a sign that some great tragedy had occurred to the divine court. 3 short years later, the first human to display the gift of magic was discovered, evidence that both the Ma and the Nano-Korean order had upheld their end of their bargain. What befell the divine court? That story is full of tragedy and pain. The visions haunt me and shattered my mind. I am not glad to have witnessed the last stand of my gods. I see them time and again whenever I close my eyes. This knowledge is what I sought as a seeker. Now I wish I could forget it. The divine court succeeded in finding a place where the veil was thinnest, where at last the veiled might be opened up to them again, should they be able to forge a key, that is. It was far from immoren shores, in a dank and fetid place on another land, at the site of slaughter where 2 countless armies had met their bloody end. So many souls had passed in such a short time that the veil was torn and rent. Even here, such passage would not be easy. The gods had to conduct a rite incomprehensible to mortal minds. It was this lingering, this gathering of ritual strength that would be their eventual undoing. It enabled them to be tracked. Humanity's dark twin found them. She did not reveal herself, but she did call upon her unholy allies. She told them where to go. In crossing between caen and Urcaen, the divine court would pass through a void, an emptiness in all realities, a place that was nowhere, yet connected to everywhere. It was like the surface of a stagnant pond into which the infernals could cast their lures, their hooks, their nets. So, in the moment of their return, as 7 members of the divine court expended so much of their strength to dive through the veil, they were ensnared and dragged elsewhere, to the grounds of the infernal's choosing, where all the advantages were theirs. Even in this direst of calamities, My gods were not so easily subdued. They fought well. At another hour I will sing of this battle of my gods, for it was glorious, even if horrific and tragic in the end. They fought a horde of infernals beyond number, led by masters so powerful they might as well have been gods themselves. None fought harder than Osiris, the sovereign of conflict, consort to Lacria. As his end came, he sought to shield his lover, the mother of all elves, with whom he had fought side by side with. His last act was to hurl a wounded Lacria away from their battlefield, past the shells of connecting realms, together with her divine raiment that marked her as ruler of the gods. His protection almost came too late, for she was bleeding and greatly diminished, her divine vitality all but spent. Reduced to little more than an echo of what she once was, she fused into her mantle as ruler of the gods. Lucinar and Nairo, gods of summer and day, also fell, consumed by darkness. I know not the fate of Lilith of autumn, but I have seen her stricken and wounded, screaming as her mind shattered. I have seen her set adrift and bleeding into the void. A worse fate was in store for Ilisla, the goddess of night, suzerain of the fallen, who had once protected the gates of the Veld, and who had welcomed the dead into the afterlife. She the Inferno seized and captured, binding her in the hope of turning her into a key to unlock the Veld and thereby gain access to caen. This goal they still work to achieve to this day. We would not recognize Ilisla now. The goddess we knew is gone. Whether she will open the door that must remain closed has not been revealed to me yet. I worry I am allowed to live solely to help them find that door. At the outset of the clash, Lacria had enough power to send Skyra away. Lacria told Skyra that she alone had the ability to shield their people, possibly to bring about a rebirth of the Divine Court. Skyra did not welcome salvation, believing that she should have fought alongside the others. Her relief at enduring is a shame she still carries to this day. 7 was the number of gods ensnared. Nisur, Father Winter, was not amongst them. He had already gone his own way, guiding his chosen people far from Ios, in hopes of securing a different destiny. Yet in the hour of their capture, Nisur sensed what has transpired, and could not turn his back from his family. He went to them at once, using all of his craft and cunning, though he arrived much too late to do anything but witness their eventual defeat. Without him, more might have been lost. Nisur seized Lacria's mantle and escaped with it, following the path that Skyra took. Seeing her drifting off course, he helped guide her back to caen, so she could return to Ios and watch over her people. In time, after both had returned wounded and diminished, Nisur realized Lacria's mantle might restore Skyra, allowing her to inherit the powers of the Narcissar of Ages, that last little remnant. But to see this come to pass, he'd have to stop his own fading, which required sealing himself in a vault of pure ice, together with the mantle, while Skyra fell into a deep slumber. He left instructions to his priests, who sought to make peace with their Iosan cousins, but were turned away. Where is the mantle? That fragment of Lacria that might have heralded a rebirth? I weep to say that I do not know. When Nisur's vault was shattered by an undead abomination that was once an Iosan lord, the mantle vanished. I fear it has fallen into the void between worlds and is lost forever, together with any hope of salvation. So, even the heroics of gods are undone. Once more, nearly all paths lead to darkness. There is a glimmer of hope, but it would require all the peoples of immoren to unite, to put aside their petty differences, which has never happened before. All share the same foe, just as it was under the Orgoth. Back in the world of mortals, the gift of magic to humanity set in motion the end of the Orgoth occupation. This changed the balance of power, though its full effects were not felt all at once, requiring development and refinement as well as invention. Still, even early on, having this weapon to wield against the indomitable Orgoth ignited the fires of hope in the rebellion. Potent spells helped pockets of Emery's resistance fight against the occupiers, weakening their hold. The Orgoth were no longer invincible. As humanity's familiarity with magic grew, their natural tendencies toward innovation helped it thrive. The humans of Immoren were always a clever people. During the years of the clockwork renaissance, they had devised a litany of machines and weapons. It was only natural that this cleverness be applied to the arcane. They discovered new ways for magic, codifying such discoveries through runic formulae, the invention of mechanica that infused technology with magical properties and principles, and ultimately in the fabrication of the cortex and colossal war machines. Combined, these developments gave the rebels the chance to fight the Orgoth on equal footing for the first time, and the repressed peoples of Immoren came together against them to drive them back from the continent, though it took many, many decades. During the 200 years of rebellion, evidence of the compact with the infernals came to Ios. The first soulless elves were born, confirming to some Iosans' fears that human magic was connected to the absence of their gods. This inspired the rise of the Retribution of Skyra, a sect dedicated to eradicating human mages. In the outer abyss, the Nonocaranian Order watched with glee as their rivals, the Felgoeth, lost footing on caen. Each battle the Orgoth lost resulted in fewer souls sacrificed. Their shrines built to deliver their souls were destroyed or buried. Every time an Orgoth champion fell in battle, yet another Felgoeth asset went to waste. By rebellion's end, the occupying force in Immoren was all but wiped out, and the last who fled its shores brought the terrible Rip-Lung plague back to the Orgoth homelands, stripping the Felgoeth of its power. The Nonocaranian Order took its place as one of the premier cabals of all infernals, already eager to ensure a rich claiming when the time to collect the debt came. The old witch of Cador, Zavana Aga, had been one of the few beings to fully understand the coming conflict. She knew quite well that all the armies of civilization and the wilderness could not stand against the ravenous tides of soul-hungry invaders. The old witch was callous enough to know that things sometimes must get worse before they get better. So, to fight the infernal's corruption, she accepted perhaps the strangest of all allies. Aga entered into her own pact with the Defiers, once humans of prehistory who stood against the god Menoth and were hurled alive into the bowels of Hyrcane. Millennia in the spirit realm transformed the Defiers into beings unlike anything in existence, and they had amassed a force of living nightmares and Grimkin servants. They desired to return to caen to enact the wicked harvest, a promise to reap a ghastly toll of those they deemed corrupted by Menoph's construct of civilization. The wicked harvest promised to inflict much pain and death on the Iron Kingdoms, but was also certain to snatch up many mortals who had forged pacts with the infernals. Choosing the better of two evils, the old witch worked with the Defiers, using mortal proxies to grant them access to the mortal world. As the wicked harvest began its reaping, many infernalists fell beneath its indiscriminate scythe. Whole cabals of cultists died to packs of Grimkin, and even several highly placed individuals the infernals had spent decades grooming were snuffed out entirely. Losing so many mortal assets in such a short time no doubt forced the Nolakarian Order's hand. If they intended to enact their bargain, it would have to be immediately, lest they lose even more marked souls that would sustain them in the mortal world. The old witch could never have halted the claiming, but by forcing the infernals to act immediately, she and her Defier allies offered a thin strand of hope to some that yet may survive it. Do not forget that the infernals have acted with haste. Their plans are not perfect, and other despair serves them. It has all been building to this. The Nolakarian Order gathers its cultists from the corners of immoren to prepare its assault. These misguided souls prepare the way for their masters, building gates that would allow them passage into the world. They stand ready to betray those who trusted them to open the way. From the gates will pour forth an army unlike any seen on caen before, and horrors to match those of the Orgoth. There may yet be a chance to save the world, to drag it back from the brink of this indiscriminate desolation. I have gone forth to the oracles and prophets of every people, trying to persuade them to put aside their old enmities. I would beg all who would listen to band together and stand firm against this destructive force, to preserve even the smallest part of the world we know. The twins still believe they can fight this foe, and they rally their faiths. But alone they cannot stand. If humanity falls and is lost, all others will also fall. This is the fate we rush towards, as though embracing our own destruction. All living souls on caen are fodder for these masters of destruction. The time to join against them is vanishing. Every bargain the infernals have struck, every contract they forged with men seeking an immediate gain with no regard for the future, has weakened this world and made it easier for those who would devour us all. Our world is poised upon the brink of oblivion. I stand as witness, an instrument of fate. We must unite or perish. I will witness the outcome either way. In the centuries that followed, the Nanocreon Order continued to grow. It took careful steps, having learned from its overreach into the Veld, preferring to cultivate single individuals and family dynasties over many years. The designs of mortals aided them in this work. Old grudges germinated in fertile soil amid the new kingdoms, growing into conflicts that have continued almost without ceasing. While gutter cultists and ambitious arcanists pledged their loyalty and offered a mere trickle of souls as an offering, the Nanocreon Order valued more of those in seats of power who could influence events on a broader stage. Lords and kings under the infernal sway allowed them to foster influential cults free of the scrutiny of religious orders, and to weaken the resolve of whole nations against the ferocity of the infernals. Many of the most storied and beloved rulers of these nations were under the influence of infernal manipulations, knowingly or unknowingly, helping to advance infernal power in the mortal realm. Enough bodies to make a mountain of dead have fallen in the petty border squabbles and civil stripes of the Iron Kingdoms. Whole tribes and nations had fallen into the graveyard of history. Each passing generation knows that the question of the next war is not one of if, but of when. For centuries, places like the Thornwood have lapped up blood spilled in battle, made only worse by the nightmare empire of Crix, and the Dragonfather Toruk's appetite for corpses and long-minded ambitions on the world. The constant strife and conflict in immoren plays the Infernal's desires. The more desperate circumstances become, the more likely it is that mortals will turn to those Infernals for aid. Great battles in history have been fought as offerings to the Order, with the souls of the battlefield dead offered in sacrifice. Those who go to war often do so out of a sense of duty, honor, or faith to their gods, not knowing that the general who sends them to die answers to distant masters. In the 400 years since the Orgoth were driven from western immoren, the Nanocreon Order had amassed souls, devouring their spiritual essence for strength and reshaping them into warriors for their upcoming invasion of the mortal world. Some have tried to forestall this inevitability, though pursuing dark deals of their own.